As a fan, you're watching the games, you're being entertained. But I have a question. How does the NBA actually make money? It's a complex question. You have teams, or let's call them franchises. You have partners. Those partners exist at the league level. Those partners exist at the team level within the local markets. You can think about partners in terms of sponsors, advertisers, merchandisers, so forth and so on. Now, let's not also forget the NBA is the third most valued sports league in the world. Not in the US, in the world. They bring in about $8.76 billion. In 2018, that was up $750 million from the previous year. So pre-COVID, they were doing about 10 to 15% growth year over year. They also have the highest average player salary of any league at $7.8 million, compared to $4.5 million and $2.9 million for the Major League Baseball, MLB, and the NFL, National Football League. So when we explore the complexity of how the NBA makes money, I'll break it down into three categories: league structure, the teams, and the players.
From three. All right, here's LeBron.
Let's get into it.
Let's see. We'll definitely review that.
So, league structure. The NBA itself is a private organization or corporation with members. In fact, they are designated as a limited corporation with members, or let's call them franchises and teams. And each of those teams operate independently and privately as a corporation in and of themselves, owned by owners. 30 NBA teams, governed by the rules and guidelines of the NBA. Now, there's two governing entities that I'll dive into, and that's what's called the C.R.E.A.M, Collective Bargaining Agreement, and B.R.I, Basketball Related Income. Now, when we think about the C.R.E.A.M, that's a contract between the owners of the teams and the players. Every single player that comes into the league is required to sign the C.R.E.A.M, and that C.R.E.A is negotiated collectively by their representation, which is the NBPA, National Basketball Players Association, who negotiates with the body of the owners. Now, the most recent agreement that's in place today dictates that between 49 and 51% of the revenue is distributed between the players and the owners. Now, the next question might be exactly what percentage is it? Is it 49? Is it 50? Is it 51? Is it 50 and a half? That's determined year over year by the performance of the league. And that will dictate that. Now, I'll have a much more extensive discussion about both the C.R.E.A and the B.R.I, but let's suffice it to say, 49 to 51% of the revenue is split between owners and players. Now, what's more important is, what are the key components inside of that $8.76 billion number, and where does it come from? There's three key areas that I'll get into. Let me start with the first one. TV revenue, by far, is the number one thing that contributes to the revenue of the NBA. Now, that number is most significant. Let's think about ESPN and TNT collectively. Their current agreement, the most recent agreement that was in place, makes up about $2.6 billion revenue for the NBA. That number does not include local market TV rights. That number can be anywhere between $120 million to about $150 million per team. And you can get a sense of that number, or which teams might make, the upper end or the lower end of that number based on their market. Los Angeles Clippers, Los Angeles Lakers, the Nets will definitely be on the higher end of that spectrum compared to the Cleveland Cavs, for example. But that is the TV revenue making up about 30% of the entirety of the NBA revenue. And that number grows each agreement. So that's a very significant impact to where that revenue comes from. Number two, merchandising. Merchandising, thinking apparel, which is centralized, run, and owned by the NBA league itself. That's why when you see your favorite team apparel, hat, shirt, socks, gloves, whatever the case may be, they will have the NBA logo on it.
I really want to.
babies. Thank you.
However, that revenue is distributed amongst the teams. The percentage of the revenue that's distributed, again, dictated by BRI and the CBA. To give an example, the most recent deal that was done between the league and Nike, 2015, resulted in approximately 245% of revenue increase per team per year. That's how large that deal was, and that's how impactful that deal was to the team, to the league. So merchandising is number 2. Number 3, a lagging third place, as you can imagine, is ticket sales. Ticket sales was a larger contributing factor, but given COVID, given everything that's been going on here throughout 2020 and coming into 2021, that will not be as significant of a number. So, in a league office or in the front office of a team, where you're going to make your bets, driving viewership, selling merchandise. Those are going to be your number 2, your primary to leverage the pool in terms of growing revenue and getting growth within your organization or in the league. So that is league structure. Let's talk about teams. That can be different based on the team that you're in, and there's 2 big areas around that because the teams are operating independently. They are independent franchises. So that means there's this component called luxury tax, which is based on the rosters, the players that are on the team, who's been drafted, who's been traded, so forth and so on, will contribute to how much they go over what's called a salary cap, which is a limit on how much teams can spend on player salaries. Now, the luxury tax is a number that's set and dictated by the league and by the CBA. That number is paid back to a team that goes over their salary cap, pays luxury tax, goes back to the league, again goes into the pot for distribution. Back in '99, during the player lockout, where there was a standoff between owners and players, part of that CBA introduced the notion of the luxury tax, was set a limit of $20 million over the salary cap as a threshold for when a team would need to pay additional luxury tax for an organization. So that is some big areas where you'll see a difference between the teams and how they operate differently and manage the income that they make within their local market, as well as what's distributed based on the CBA and what's known as the basketball related income. Now, the additional discussion that I'll do at a later date, I'll dive into all of the line items within the BRI so that you can understand how teams are leveraging various items to generate more revenue for their market. Now, number 3, third area is the players. Let me dive into that. Now, for the players, within that realm, let me remind you of this, how player salaries are generated. Within the US, of course, professional sports, not unique to the NBA. There's 3 contributing factors: the number of games, the number of teams, the number of active players on each team. So, if you just do simple math, if there are fewer games, more players, and the same revenue to split more ways equals a smaller average player salary. So why is the NBA at $7.8 million per player average salary versus the NFL at $2.9 million? One of the factors, not the only, one of the factors is that equation: fewer games, more players, revenue to split more ways. NBA, 30 teams, approximately 14 players in each team, about 420 players in the NBA, compared to the NFL at 32 players, 53 players per team, results in add in, and you have practice squads, so forth and so on, you'll get close to 2,000 players in the NFL compared to 420. Now, the other contributing factor, of course, is what's negotiated in the CBA. But we won't dive into that right now, but that's just simple math as one of the metrics for determining what average salary might be for a team or a league, and its popularity, of course. Another factor is thinking about the impact to the players themselves. So they generate money on their own independently through what's called endorsements that they get from various vendors, suppliers, so forth and so on. It can be anything from soft drinks to shoes to other types of apparel. The list goes on and on and on. And so that is something that will enable them to be able to generate more money for themselves, as well as driving more adoption and fandom for their team. The other big area is this notion of the contracting structure within the NBA as well. They are one of the few leagues that has this notion of what's called a supermax. Supermax contracts allow for a certain set of players that meet a criteria. One of the criteria, for example, is MVP status, in which they can be paid north of $200 million in their contracts. There's a number of players that have met that threshold. Giannis, James Harden, Steph Curry, so forth and so on. There's a number of players that have reached that upper echelon of contracts, which can exceed the standard contract size that you might see for superstars. A small set of players get that, but that still goes into the money that a team spends and how far they're allowed to go over the traditional salary cap for specific players. So given that, those are a number of different factors that go into effect for determining the value of a team, the revenue the league makes, as well as the money that a player can make. But why? But why is a player and those endorsements and those contracts so critical, and how are they able to do that? And there's one key component area that I believe drives that, and that's the marketing effect. The NBA is one of the few leagues in the world that really promotes and drives fandom and excitement through the players themselves. Not necessarily just the team, but the players. They're very active in social media. That entices sponsors, that entices their partners to get engaged. Wherever the eyeballs are, wherever the dollars are being spent, you can guarantee that's where your partners are going to contribute and participate more. And so that's what you can expect to see. The trick will be, how do you address this in 2021? This upcoming season, with COVID and everything else going on, you're going to see a drop in ticket sales, a drop in concessions, a drop in parking and brick and mortar sales, shifting to digital channels, shifting to viewership online, shifting to viewership through cable TV, etc. And so that will be very interesting to see. And these are some of the metrics and guiding principles for how they make decisions about the team, the league, and the players. So that's the complexity of how the NBA makes money: the league, the teams, the players, the partners, the CBA, BRI, contracts and deals. Those are all in that big bucket of various knobs and levers that you can pull to determine who's successful and who's not, who makes money, who doesn't. I hope you enjoyed it. Stay tuned. I'm going to be releasing more topics around the NBA and what's going on. I'm Brandon. Thanks for watching. Like the channel, subscribe to the channel.